Guys, so this week we are moving on to chapter 4. We're actually moving on to a whole new set of topics. So the first three chapters, 1, 2, and 3 was all the intro material. So hopefully you've looked through all of that and you've taken exam 1. So make sure if you didn't take exam 1, you have till this Thursday. So make sure that you get that done over chapters 1, 2, and 3. So that was kind of an overview of the whole criminal justice system. Now we're going to start focusing specifically on the 3 parts of the system. So we're going to go into a lot more detail in each of those 3 parts. So we're going to start with policing and cover policing, then we'll go courts, and then we'll go corrections. Okay, so that's what we'll do today. So today we're going to start talking about policing. So I'll share my PowerPoint and we can start talking about policing. Okay, so when you're talking about policing, the first, which is the 3rd branch of the criminal justice system, we have to start by talking about police authority and jurisdiction. So we said that the criminal justice system is made up of 3 parts: police, courts, and corrections. So we are going to look at police for the first part. Okay, so my question is, can police do anything they want anywhere they want? And the answer is no. They can only do things if they actually have jurisdiction. So we're going to talk about this concept of jurisdiction today, because you have to understand jurisdiction to understand what police can do. Okay, so jurisdiction is the geographic area where a police can exert their authority. Now, all parts of the criminal justice system have jurisdictional issues. So police have jurisdiction, courts have jurisdiction, corrections have jurisdiction. So you have to understand that jurisdiction is the area where you're allowed to exert your power. So with policing, it's generally a geographic area. Where in that geographic area are they allowed to use their police powers? Now, there is this concept called concurrent jurisdiction. Concurrent jurisdiction is when one police department has shared jurisdiction with other police departments. So we're going to talk about the levels of jurisdiction in a minute. We're going to talk about state, local, federal. Sometimes federal agency has jurisdiction over the same areas that the state would have or that the county would have. So their jurisdictions can overlap. They're not like exclusive. So sometimes more than one department will share jurisdiction with another department. Okay, so when we're talking about jurisdiction, we're breaking it down into 3 separate jurisdictional levels. So we have federal jurisdiction, we have state jurisdiction, and we have local jurisdiction. Okay, so we have certain federal agencies that have jurisdiction over the whole country. We have state that are going to have jurisdiction just in the state. And then we have local that are just going to be at the county or the city, town, or village. So that would be local jurisdiction. So we have that. So we're going to start by talking about federal law enforcement. What jurisdiction does federal law enforcement have? So there are lots of federal agencies. We have lots of different federal agencies. Remember, federal jurisdiction is all over the country. So they have the ability to operate anywhere in the whole United States. That's federal jurisdiction. There are lots of different federal agencies. So although they may have geographic jurisdiction everywhere, they may only have jurisdiction over certain subjects. So that's kind of what we call subject matter jurisdiction. They're only allowed to hear or patrol or police, I guess, certain area types of crimes, I guess. So these are all the different federal agencies. We have the FBI. They are the primary law enforcement agency of the whole country. The U.S. Forest Service, Park Service, National Park Service. ATF is alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. So that tells you a little bit about their jurisdiction. DEA is Drug Enforcement Agency. We have EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. We have IRS, Internal Revenue System. We have CIA. They are the Central Intelligence Agency. We have Secret Service, Department of Justice, or the Attorney General's Office. We have Customs and Border Patrol, CBP. We have the Bureau of Prisons, Postal Inspector Service, U.S. Marshal Service, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. So that's not all the federal law enforcement agencies, that's just some of them, but it gives you an idea of all the different levels or groups of federal agencies. So if you become a federal law enforcement officer, you could work with any of these different federal agencies. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. So we have this thing called the Department of Homeland Security. What happened is after September 11th, which we just celebrated, I guess not celebrated, but memorialized the World Trade Centers being brought down by the planes on September 11th. After that, they did a lot of research and they realized that the CIA and the FBI had a lot of information that they weren't sharing. And all these agencies had different pieces of information, but they weren't sharing it with each other. So after September 11th, they unified a lot of the federal agencies together under the Department of Homeland Security. And their goal is to prevent further domestic emergencies and terrorism. So they kind of united a lot of these federal agencies together under the Department of Homeland Security. So they're kind of all centrally located under all of that. So these are the agencies that are now currently located under the Department of Homeland Security. So they are all under one umbrella. So there's one cabinet member that's in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, and that person oversees all of these different agencies. It's the boss of all of these agencies. So the president being the main boss, and then the cabinet member is the person that oversees all these agencies. And then each agency has their own boss, but they're all unified together under this one department. Now, what's interesting is you don't see the FBI or the CIA, which was the two that were really criticized the most for not sharing information during 9/11. So FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They are the primary law enforcement for the federal laws. CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, they are the ones that gather information and intelligence outside the United States. So the CIA actually does not have jurisdiction within the country. Their jurisdiction is outside of our country. And so you would think, well, why wouldn't they be part of it? So they were part of the main reason why data wasn't shared and that we didn't know that September 11th was going to happen. And it's just political. They just were very powerful and they lobbied Congress and they said, we don't want to be part of that. We want to be part of our own thing. So the FBI is actually part of the Department of Justice still and is under the Department of Justice. And I believe the CIA is the Department of State. So they are kind of their own entities still. They did not get pushed under the Department of Homeland Security. They definitely have increased ways to share information though, so that we don't have the same thing happen like September 11th. So this is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have a little video here that I linked online that you can watch. It's really good. It's an overview of the FBI, the training and everything you go through if you want to become an FBI agent. So I recommend that you watch it. So the FBI was originally not the FBI. It was called something else. And then eventually it was turned into what in the 1930s, it was turned into what we now consider the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So J. Edgar Hoover, that's who is in the picture. He professionalized or sort of unified and turned the Federal Bureau of Investigation into what it is today. So again, they're the primary law enforcement officers for the federal government. So if you break federal law, the FBI is going to be the ones that investigate and find the evidence that show that you committed the crime. And then they would turn it over to the Department of Justice, to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then that's who would prosecute you. So that's the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And mostly federal crimes are going to be things that cross state lines or things that impact the whole country, like internet or phone service or anything like that. All the drug crimes. So that's mostly a lot of the things that they're going to investigate. They've become more and more investigators for terrorist threats also. So you see a lot of their concentration focusing on that. They also have a crime lab. So if you look it up, this is their mission. You can read their mission: uphold the laws, investigation, protect from terrorist activities, provide leadership. One of the big things that they do is they provide guidance and help to other law enforcement agencies. Since it's a federal agency, they have a lot more funding and a lot more resources. So a lot of state and local agencies will contact the FBI and ask for assistance. Okay, so that's the mission of the FBI. So the FBI is broken into different divisions. So it's a huge entity. It has lots and lots and lots of divisions. It's broken into smaller divisions. So there's a crime lab division, there's counterintelligence divisions. So there's all kinds of separate and distinct divisions within it. So and there's a lot of people that are civilians in the FBI. So they aren't actually even working law enforcement in a sense. They're doing more civilian analysis work and things like computer work and things like that. So you even have civilian divisions within the FBI. So the CIA is what we would consider probably one of the second major law enforcement agencies at the federal level, and they are defense for our country. So they carry out intelligence gathering and finding information about enemies against this country. And so they mostly operate outside of the United States. They are embedded or in a lot of the embassies across the whole world. And they try to find out what is going on in different countries and report back that information to our president. So if you think of the word spies, these are really the spies, the Central Intelligence Agency. They're the ones that kind of spy and gather information outside. So you can see that they're really important to work with the FBI because they're going to gather the information about potential threats to our country, provide that information to the FBI, where the FBI can investigate and arrest people for committing those crimes. Okay, so that is kind of the difference between the CIA and FBI. FBI operates within the federal jurisdiction. A CIA operates outside of the United States. Okay, so those are the main federal agencies. But we also have law enforcement agencies that exist at the state level. So we have state law enforcement agencies. Now, just a little bit of history about the state agencies. So the first state police that was ever created was in 1835, and that was Texas. It was the Texas Rangers. They were doing a lot of border patrol types of things, Wild West types of things. So they weren't what we would consider a modern police force. They were more like sheriffs out west types of things, but they are technically the very first state police department that was ever created. The second was Massachusetts, but what we think of police today and the departments that we have today really was developed, and for the first time it was in Pennsylvania. So you see these modern police forces more starting in Pennsylvania and then spreading to New York and different things like that. Okay, so what is New York State's police department called? It is the New York State Troopers. Okay, so if you ever heard of the Troopers or the New York State Police, those are our state police that have jurisdiction throughout the entire state. Okay, so they can arrest people or investigate things anywhere within New York State boundaries. Now, when you're talking about state police forces, there's two different sort of models that are used for state police. You have what are called the centralized model and the decentralized model. So centralized model means all their police forces under one title. Decentralized is when you have a road patrol or a highway patrol and then an investigation unit separately. Okay, so you kind of have two separate divisions within the police force. So New York, think about if you know what we have in New York, and it's the centralized model. So we just have the New York State Police. And now within the New York State Police, you have some that do patrol, highway patrol, the thruway patrol, and some that do more investigation types of stuff. But they are all together state troopers. The decentralized model would have a whole force like the Georgia State Patrol, that gets its own force. And then you have a separate and distinct force that's going to do the investigations. I think it's the Georgia, I think it's the GBA, GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. That's different than the Highway Patrol. So you want to make sure you know what kind of model your state is. We are centralized. We just have one force. Here's some other state agencies. So you can see there's a variety of other state agencies. Any state agency that has the authority to arrest and enforce laws are considered state law enforcement agencies. So state university police. So if you go to a big university, their state university police are considered state officers. State park police, way station police, highway patrol, fishing and wildlife agencies. Those are all considered part of state law enforcement. Stop it. Sorry, just have to listen to my phone. Okay, the next one is local agencies. So we have the federal, they have jurisdiction throughout the whole country. We have state, they have jurisdiction just within the state. Then local is going to have jurisdiction just whatever the local entity is. Okay, so it depends what the local entity is. Now, sheriffs are going to be county. So we have, the state is divided into lots of counties. The school is in Genesee County. Some of you may live in different counties. I live in Erie County. Every county in the whole state has its own sheriff's department. Okay, so the sheriff has two duties. Every county has a sheriff's department and they always have two duties. Number one, they are required to enforce the laws. So just like any police, if they see people violating the law, they arrest and they gather evidence and turn it over to the prosecutor and try to help punish people that break the law. So that's their first duty, is to enforce the laws. But the county sheriffs are also responsible for operating the county jails. So anytime somebody's arrested and goes to a jail, those jails are operated by the county. So a lot of times you have sheriff's deputies, some work on the road and some work in the jail, but they're all part of the county sheriff's office. And the sheriff is the one that's the boss or in charge of that sheriff's department. So the sheriff is the boss, and then the deputies are either law enforcement or operating the jail. So that's always the duty of the sheriff. Now, there are other local agencies. So campus police, since we're a community college, we have campus police are considered local police. We have city, town, or village. So if you live in a city, you may have your own city police force. New York City has its own police force. The city of Buffalo have the Buffalo City Police. If you live in a town, I live in the town of Hamburg. Hamburg has its own town police. Sometimes you live in villages and the village itself will have its own police. So where I live in Hamburg, we have a village of Hamburg and we have the town of Hamburg. We actually have the village of Hamburg police. They're their own force. And then the town of Hamburg has its own police. And then we have the county and then we have the state. So you can see there's multiple levels that all overlap in certain areas. Coroners and medical examiners are often considered local law enforcement. Housing authorities, so any sort of housing, public housing types of programs, they're going to have their own local police force. Water patrol, Marines, things like that. Transit police, if you have transportation or buses or subways, those are going to have their own police. Tribal police, so native lands, they often have their own police force for those lands. Those are all local. Now, sometimes there's things that are called joint task forces. Joint task forces are often, or sometimes they call them fusion centers, but we a lot of times around here refer to them as joint task forces. What they are is sometimes they ask people from multiple agencies to form together on one team to conquer specific issues. So let's say you live in an area that has lots and lots of drug problems or gangs. Gangs are a good example. You have lots of gangs. So you may want the federal law enforcement to be involved if it's a gang that crosses state lines. So you may have a couple FBI agents. You might have a couple of state police that are part of it. You may have a couple of the sheriffs that are part of it. Okay. And you could have even like a city Buffalo City Police that are part of it. So you bring people from multiple agencies together. They all have resources. They all have jurisdiction, different things, and they can pool those resources together to try to tackle a specific topic. So they may have more intelligence and data on certain areas, and they can all share that in order to tackle a specific issue. And that's what we would call a joint task force. Now, the last one I want to talk about is what we call private protective services. This is often called the fourth part of the criminal justice system. So we said the three parts: police, courts, and corrections. Well, private security is often considered the fourth branch. It's not a governmental agency, it's private law enforcement. So it's not really part of our government, but since it's has grown and it's such a big thing, it's often considered the fourth branch. So private protective services are when a private company creates an agency or gets employees together, and they provide security for things through a contract basis. So they are not governmental employees. They're paid by a private company to provide sort of security and enforcement of their own rules. So there's lots of private protective services. So anytime somebody works for like a department store as a public safety officer in the mall law enforcement, there's the ones that drive the Brinks trucks that go around and pick up the money from all the stores and bring it to the bank. Those are all what we call private protective services. It's the fastest growing part of the criminal justice system. There's lots and lots of jobs. They pay pretty well. So it's really, really a good job to have. In fact, I often tell students to take the security guard training here at the school and get their security guard license, because there's lots of great jobs that you can have while you're in college, while you're earning your degree, and they pay really good money, and you're getting experience in the criminal justice field also. Their goals are slightly different than law enforcement. Obviously, law enforcement wants to enforce the laws. We're going to talk about the purpose and the responsibilities of law enforcement in another lecture, but theirs are a little different. They aren't necessarily enforcing laws because they're not police officers. They are protecting private property. So they're hired by private entities, and they're hired to protect those people's property. They're there to prevent crime, to keep crimes from occurring to that private company. They don't arrest, but they can detain and then have the police come. They're for loss prevention, to keep destruction or stealing of that private company's property. They're there for fire protection. So if there was any sort of fire types of things or fire prevention, making sure the fire extinguishers are working and the exits are there, and to guide people that need help. And access control. So a lot of buildings don't want people that don't belong there to be there. So you may have private security services sit at the door, and anybody that comes in has to check in and sign in. And so it's a monitoring who comes and goes within that structure. Remember, they're there to serve the employee, the private employee. They're not there to serve the community. They're there to represent the interest of the private company that actually hired them. And then one of the last forces that we'll talk about is what we call international police agencies. So with the globalization of the world and people traveling so much and crossing borders, crime also has become an international issue. So there's a lot of issues with drug transactions, with weapons transactions, with human trafficking types of things, with internet frauds that cross international borders. So it's hard to have just a police force for just a country now when these crimes can cross borders so fast. So there are different international agencies that are have resources and are tools to try to stop those large international crimes. And the main one is Interpol, so the International Criminal Police Organization. They're not necessarily out there making arrests, but they provide resources to the law enforcement of different countries to try to stop these international crimes. Now, Europe, their countries are so small, they're like our states, and so they're really close together. So Europe, the EU, European Union, has formed their own international police force that does cross national borders, and they are enforcing the EU laws. So the European police force is also considered an international police force. Okay, so I just have a little check to make sure you understand the distinctions. So name the agency with jurisdiction. Okay, so a traffic ticket in Batavia. If you got a traffic ticket in Batavia, what law enforcement would it be? Federal, local, or state or international? And Batavia is just a city, so it would be local. Kidnapping across state lines. Anytime you're talking about crossing state lines, it's going to be federal. A mall police officer at the Galleria Mall, that's going to be private protective services. A murder at the Department of Motor Vehicles. The Department of Motor Vehicles is a state agency. Since it's a murder at a state agency, it's going to be state law enforcement officers. A domestic violence incident in the city of Batavia. Well, it's a city and it's going to be their local police, so it's going to be local jurisdiction. Counterfeiting money ring. So money, anything to do with money is federal, and it's going to be federal law enforcement that enforces it. A robbery at GCC parking lot. GCC parking lot is a local entity. It would be our local law enforcement, and it would also be probably like the county or the city of Batavia. A traffic accident on the New York State Thruway. That's state, so it would be state jurisdiction. And a burglary on an Indian and Native American lands, then that is going to be local. And then human trafficking between Asia and the United States would be international. Okay. Oops, I gave the answers. Sorry. So you can click through those. I'm just going to go fast. So hopefully that explains all the jurisdictional levels that you need. You can see I have a jurisdiction practice assessment that you're welcome to take. Again, remember, assessments are not graded. They're just ways for you to review the material and make sure you understand the material. You can also now complete Chapter 4 assignment. So Chapter 4 assignment is going to look at the issue of jurisdiction, and you're going to comment about a federal agency, not the FBI, and then you're going to talk about one of the local agencies around you. So that is your homework. So hopefully that makes sense. If you need anything, always reach out and ask. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, and I will see you for the next lecture.